Welcome to the 2020 National Autism Conference presentation on toy training for individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities. My name is Barry Morgenstern. So I am going to sincerely miss my trip to Pennsylvania this year. Every year I get a nice trip to the National Autism Conference where I get to see all of my Pennsylvania friends and see some absolutely great presentations. And this year looks like it's going to be no different in the sense that they have a fantastic lineup of great presenters and great presentations happening, except this year it's online due to COVID-19. So it's going to be a change for a lot of us. Typically, my presentations involve lots of audience participation and discussion and hands-on activities and so on. And this year, we're not going to have any of that. But I've given the presentation a lot of thought, and I think I'm going to be able to deliver an effective and interesting presentation to you so that you can be more successful in your efforts to toilet train individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities. So the first thing I would say is that I am not going to give you the 25 years of experience I have doing this, in the sense of this is not the great system that I have been using for the last 25 years, but I've done an awful lot of toilet training. I've been in the bathroom with children with autism and developmental disabilities a lot, and I've learned a lot of things. And this is your opportunity to be wise, to learn from my mistakes, and to improve in your opportunities to teach children with autism and other developmental disabilities. So I will say, personally, that I do have a special genetic advantage that allows me to be a little bit more successful with toilet training than some other people. Or will take you a little bit more work if you do not have this genetic advantage that I have. And my genetic advantage is I have an absolutely terrible sense of smell. I don't smell that much. So horrible smells don't necessarily bother me very much. Where they might bother you, and it will take you some getting used to in order to be successful with toilet training. Now me, there could be urine accidents, bowel accidents. I'll clean it up and eat lunch. Doesn't bother me a bit. I'm all fine, ready to go on to the next thing. But if you have this issue, it might take you a little bit of time to get used to it. Okay, so toilet training, let's jump right into it and get into the procedures. The first thing I would like to say is, well, why is toilet training so important? And it seems obvious that young children with developmental disabilities have so many things to learn. They have to learn to talk and social skills and language skills and academic skills. I just want to emphasize that this is an absolutely critical skill, that it involves social participation, even in preschool. It's hard to really be fully integrated into preschool if you don't have toileting skills. There are health issues too. It involves physical discomfort often. It involves potential skin irritations and other health issues if it's not addressed quickly. It comes with hygiene in general. It also generally restricts your opportunities if you haven't been through it. So children with autism or even typically developing children, daycares won't take children who haven't been toilet trained. For older children, it's extremely socially stigmatizing if they're not toilet trained. It restricts their opportunities in residential and vocational placements for older children with autism and developmental disabilities. So it's an absolutely essential skill to target as soon as feasible. Now, on the other hand, parents in particular often find toilet training to be extremely stressful. There's several studies showing that the vast majority of parents, even typically developing parents of typically developing children or parents of children with autism and developmental disabilities, find the toileting training experience stressful. So it's partially, I think, because it's difficult to teach children to learn to use the toilet appropriately. So people find it stressful. And then if you failed at something and their child is now 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 14 years of age, well, then it becomes even more stressful because this is something you can't just forget about. It's 3, 5, 8 times a day you're dealing with the toilet training. So um, I'm going to try and get to the point by the end of this presentation, if you're a parent watching this, that hopefully your stress will be way, way down and you're going to feel like you can do this. The same thing occurs for teachers and paraprofessionals in schools. Those that have tried to do toilet training and haven't had sufficient support in order to successfully manage this challenge find it an extremely stressful activity. Many teachers and paraprofessionals were really pulling their hair out to the point where they didn't know what to do. And with a little bit of support, often they're able to be successful with the toilet training procedures. So that's my goal for today. If you're feeling like I can't do this or I don't know what to do, I'm hopeful that by the end of today's presentation, you feel like, I can do this. I have got it. I know that I will be successful. So the first thing I suggest you think about is attitude. And the attitude is what I call the POOGI attitude. POOGI means process of ongoing improvement. This concept comes from an old 1980s business book by Goldratt called The Goal. And it has nothing to do with autism or other developmental disabilities, but I have found this concept to be extremely useful, especially for something like toilet training. When you're doing toilet training, things will go wrong. There will be mistakes. There will be problems that will come up. If you have an attitude of POOGI, that means, okay, I'm going to learn for this, and I'm going to do better, and I'm going to keep going on and on until I am successful, you'll be much more likely to manage the stress of dealing with toilet training than if you get very upset and anxious over every little thing that goes wrong and every little thing that goes right. So an attitude of POOGI, I think, helps tremendously. Okay, next. Is your toddler ready for toilet training? Or actually anybody that you might be working with if you're working with an older student, are they ready for toilet training? Well, I think this is an important issue to consider because in my view, this is one of the most common reasons for failure, simply starting too soon. If the child is not really ready to begin toilet training and you start, even if you are successful, it's going to be much harder and take much longer. So it's worth taking a few minutes to go through and say, what are all the things that the child needs to have in order to be ready to start toilet training? First thing I would say is problem behaviors. If you are at a point where the child is having dangerous self-interest behaviors or severe aggressive behaviors or anything like that, I would suggest that you handle those issues first before you try and deal with toilet training specifically. Even, of course, there are children with autism and other developmental disabilities and typically developing children that have been successfully trained even though they had some problem behavior still occur. It is certainly possible, but it is much more difficult. And especially now in the last few years, there has been such wonderful research coming out on the practical treatment of problem behaviors that I would highly recommend you do that process first before you engage in a toilet training protocol. So if that's the case, if you need to really work on problem behavior, I suggest looking up the work of Greg Hanley. He has presented on problem behavior assessment and treatment of problem behaviors at past National Autism Conference workshops. Those videos should be available in the archives. Another place you can look is practicalfunctionalassessment.com, which is Greg Hanley's free website. And the professional website is ftfbc.com. Which is the website where they offer free online tutorials and videos and trainings and things like that. Some of those cost money for CEs, but they're well worth it. And so I would highly recommend a process like that, or work with a BCBA or someone else experienced in the effective treatment of problem behaviors before getting started. Again, it's possible to treat toilet training and to do it successfully, even though there are some problem behaviors occurring. Strongly suggest you do that first. In a similar manner, sometimes when we say problem behaviors, the parents say, well, there aren't really any problem behaviors in the sense that the child doesn't have outbursts, aggressions, or self-injurious behaviors, or really dangerous sorts of behaviors. But they still have some problems following directions in the sense that they're not willing to participate. Now, when I say follow directions here, I don't necessarily mean just language skills. Of course, it's wonderful to follow directions. I can say, go to bed and pull your pants down, and so on while I'm teaching them. That's just great. But even if they don't have the language skills to be able to do that, even if they're nonverbal, we can successfully toilet train children like that. It's just helpful if they're willing to at least go along with the activity. That can mean even just as little as following a prompt, or responding to a picture or a gesture or so on. It's not necessarily the verbal language skills that are absolutely essential. It's the willingness to participate and go along with the activity. Okay. The child should have some amount of bladder control before you begin toilet training. I recommend about 1 hour at a time. Can the child keep a dry diaper for about 1 hour? If not, I think toilet training is going to be a lot harder. There are some procedures out there recommending how to increase your bladder control, but usually just time for most individuals will solve this problem. The child might be a little young, and if you wait a little bit, usually the child will start to develop some bladder. Okay. A common problem with children with autism or developmental disabilities, and quite frankly, lots of toddlers, is problems around the feeding and drinking, and especially drinking. If you have a child that doesn't want to drink any fluids, obviously, toilet training is going to be an extremely difficult challenge for that individual because you're not going to get sufficient opportunities. Again, this is an issue that I highly recommend you address before you even try and deal with the toilet. So if you, and again, there are great literature out there in behavior analysis, and if you work with the BCBA or other professional who can help you increase the consumption of food and drinks until you get it to a reasonable point where the child is eating and drinking at a reasonable level, toilet training will be much more difficult. It's not that it's impossible, but I highly recommend it as a prerequisite before you start working on toilet training. The next thing that I think people don't give consideration to is, are you ready? Parents or the school team, and preferably both, are you ready to implement this procedure? This is going to be a time-consuming procedure. It's going to take up a lot of your time, and quite frankly, it takes some emotional energy to be able to do this. So I think there are two good decisions that are perfectly appropriate. You could say, yes, we're ready to go. We got everything we need, and I'm going to go through all the steps to you to suggest here is everything you need in order to be successful, and here's everything you need to get ready and training and so on. And if you're ready, great, go ahead. Or another perfectly appropriate decision is to say, you know what, we are not ready. I can't handle it right now. I have a big thing coming up at work. The standardized testing are coming up in school. I can't do with it right now. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to say, we're not ready to handle this right now. We have too many other things, and we're going to wait until next month or a month and a half or whatever it is until you're ready to fully implement. Either of those, I think, can be fine decisions. The bad decision is to say, well, let's give it a try and see how it goes. That, to me, is not a good decision because that doesn't, toilet training is hard. It requires a commitment. You have to say, I'm going to be able to do this. And so the worst thing you can do is put in a tremendous amount of effort and then fail a week or 2 or 3 weeks into it. It makes it harder in the future when you try and reintroduce toilet training again. So I highly recommend, do not start if you're not ready. It's perfectly okay to say we're going to wait and we need to get everything ready. We need to be sure, or to get you're ready. Either you're ready or you're not. Don't go, I'm going to just try and see how it goes. Much better off, make a commitment, make sure you have everything ready, and go for it. Now, for some children, usually this isn't essential, but for many, many children, it might be appropriate to have a medical check before you start toilet training, especially if there are any issues around constipation or issues, difficulty urinating, and so on, just to have everything checked out to make sure that the child is ready to begin and there's not any medical intervention that might be necessary in order for the child to be successful. So it's probably a good policy to just have a quick checkup from the doctor to make sure you're ready to begin, but especially if you're noticing any problems that might interfere with the toilet training. Here's the question that everybody wants to know. How long is it going to take? Can I really do toilet training in a day? Well, it is possible, unlikely, but it is certainly possible to do toilet training in a day. But the truth is, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on, one, what procedures you use to teach, how much time you're going to spend on it every day, and especially the learner's skills. That certain skills that learners have can sometimes make it much more likely that they're going to learn much faster. So there's a whole wide variety of decisions that you have to make and skills that the learner has that determine how long it's going to take. So I'll go through some of those so to give you an idea of the kinds of things that make it go faster or slower. First, there are many skills, many skills that the learner have that can make the training go faster. You don't, I want to be clear, you do not have to have any of these skills in order to be successful. You can be successful in toilet training without any of these skills. But if you have some of these, wow, do they make it go a lot faster. First is some of the basic self-help around the toilet training. Does the child know how to pull up and pull down their pants? Does the child know the basics of washing their hands? Turn on the water, get some soap, rub your hands together. Does the child know the basics? Will the child walk to the toilet independently? Say, go to the toilet, go to the bathroom. Will they walk to the bathroom by themselves? If you have some of these basic skills, obviously, then you won't have to teach them during the toilet training process. And obviously, things go much faster. If you have to first teach how to pick up your pants, how to wash your hands, and obviously, as part of the toilet training process, it's going to make the process go a little bit longer. Another useful skill is, does the child understand when I give you a direction and you follow the direction, and whether that's with language or without language, remember, that doesn't matter, but just if they understand when I give a direction and they follow the direction, that it leads to a reward. If not, you can teach this very quickly, but again, it's one more thing that you have to do. If the child understands this already, boom, the process is much faster. Here is a wonderful skill that some children with autism have and are wonderful at, and other children have more difficulty with. So if the child has the ability to imitate, and you might show video, it allows other skills. You might show videos, you might model different parts of the procedure. And if the child can imitate, it's much faster than trying to do it with physical prompts and so on. So again, you can learn without imitation skills, but children who already have imitation will generally learn the toilet training procedure much faster than children who are not able to imitate. If the child does not have imitation skills, this is one I think you might want to consider when you're saying, are we ready? Because almost all children with autism and developmental disabilities with an appropriate training procedure can learn to imitate well. And then once they learn to imitate, the toilet training procedure will be much faster. So you might spend a lot more time on the toilet training. Then you're still going to want to teach imitation at some point anyway. So you might want to consider whether you want to teach the imitation first and then do toilet training. Finally, language skills. Obviously, language skills are not a prerequisite for toilet training, but if the child can talk, if the child has some language that you can explain some of the things and they understand if then rules and so on, and a lot of kids at 2, 3 years old can do that no problem. If they can do that, I highly recommend using those skills, and obviously it will make the toilet training procedure go faster. Another nice to have is walk. So I one time had a student who was doing beautifully in toilet training. We were about a week into the process, maybe 6 days, and it was nearly complete. The child was going independently in the toilet, and then the child was outside playing on the time when we weren't doing toilet training, we weren't there, and hurt his ankle and couldn't walk for a week or two, maybe three. It was really a difficult, painful accident. And so the parent had to carry him into the bathroom, and the whole procedure, he lost all of the procedures. It was very, very hard to reacquire the skills. So if you have a student that does not walk because of a physical difficulty, obviously those students can be toilet trained frequently. But if there is physical difficulty with the walking that looks like it's going to develop, like the child's developing walking skills, and it looks like it's going to develop, you might want to consider waiting until those physical skills are developed, because it obviously makes the procedures easier and simpler. All right, so sometimes people make rash decisions when it comes to toilet training about which type of method they're going to use. And I want to talk through, there's many methods out there. I want to talk through a couple of the key decisions about one of the most important methods. Do you want it the fast method or the slow method? Now, when it's presented like that, almost everybody says, well, of course, I want the fast method. I want this over as soon as possible. If I can do toilet training in a day, that's great. I will do toilet training in a day. I want this done. I want it over. But I'd like to present to you there are good reasons to choose the fast method, but there's also reasons to choose the slow method, and I want you to strongly consider that. So the slow method is what I call typical toilet training, where you're going to teach without disrupting the child's everyday routine. That means in the context of school, the preschool teacher will take the child to the bathroom occasionally at home. You're going to take the child to the bathroom occasionally. And you working like that can be successful, but obviously it's going to take a lot longer. And there are advantages to not disrupting the child's schedule, to teaching a whole wide variety of things while the child is learning to toilet train. On the other hand, intensive toilet training involves focusing on toilet training for a very intense period of time. And when I say intense, I mean intense, maybe 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day of really focused time on toilet training. And if you do that, obviously the child will learn to toilet much faster than if you use a typical method without disrupting their schedule. And I'd like to suggest there are good reasons for doing both. So there are a couple of good advantages for using a typical training method. One is not disrupting the schedule. The child can participate in the toilet training and still participate in preschool, still go outside and play, still do all kinds of other things that are valuable. The second reason why it's an advantage is much easier to implement for parents and teachers. An intense toilet training procedure can take really tremendous amounts of skill, time, and energy that is sometimes just not possible. Now, the disadvantages, of course, it takes a lot longer. And if you have students with the most severe disabilities, with significant severe disabilities, there's a significant chance that they just simply will not be successful with difficult training. Now, the intensive training also has tremendous advantage. We're going to do this fast, we're going to get it done, and then boom, it's over, we'll move on to the next thing. And it can be much, much faster. You can learn like in a day or 3 days, or children with developmental disabilities typically take a little bit longer than other than typically developing children. So it might take 5 days or 8 days or 10 days to finish the primary part of the training. Um, and another advantage of this is if there's a learner with severe disabilities, you're not wasting their time with typical training, which has a low probability of success. Some big disadvantages to this, though. It is usually necessary to discontinue virtually all other programming, all other school programs, all other social programs, everything else that is happening. It can be very stressful and emotional for the parent and teacher. Again, remember I said we're talking about sitting in the bathroom for 6 hours, 8 hours, long period of time, and for a long amount of time. Sometimes 5, 10, 12 days in the bathroom in order to be successful with this method. So there are big positives for both, and I strongly suggest, based on the individual situation, that the teams strongly consider which method they want to use. So I would like to suggest that your top priority, your top consideration is not how long does it take. That's one of the considerations. One consideration is how long does it take? I want to know. I want this over with. But the second consideration is what is this going to look like in the long term? And so I suggest you take a long-term view of this. Because if you train in a few days, that's great. But there are probably other things that are going to be necessary going forward. For example, one of the most common mistakes I see is not mastering the wiping skills at a very young age. At 2.5, 4.5, teaching wiping is not such a big problem. Even at 6 or 7, it's fine. But there are many kids that were toilet trained with rapid methods, and they were done in 3, 4, 5 days at 4 years old. And they might have a significant developmental disability. And so now they're 15, 16, 17, 19, 23, and they have not mastered this skill. It's a very, very important skill. Now, if you haven't mastered this skill at 18, it is much, much harder to get someone willing to do the training that's going to be necessary in order to master the skill of writing appropriately. So again, I highly, highly recommend that very early on, when you're doing the toilet training, this becomes an essential part of the skill. If you toilet train in a day or 3 days, you probably didn't get to the skill. Maybe the child's going and there's no accents, and that can be wonderful. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that you want to consider that there are other parts to the toileting process that are going to be equally important to master. Here's another common issue that comes up with parents, that especially the dads, they want the boys to learn to stand right away. And of course, eventually you will teach that. At the beginning, though, it is highly, highly recommended that the boys learn toilet training sitting down. One is, when you've got the bowel training, you don't have to teach them to discriminate when to stand and when to sit. It's an important part of the procedures. It is much, much harder to teach bowel training later if you have started by teaching them to stand for urination training. So again, highly, highly recommended at the beginning, start with sitting. Another common question that comes up is, I teach the child to request? Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to teaching them to request. So here at this situation, I think I cheated a little bit, like this little boy is interrupting his mom who's giving the news. And I think he really wanted a snack and not that he had to use the bathroom. But you don't necessarily want your toddler interrupting you every single time they have to go to the bathroom. We'd like them to self-initiate, right? To just, if you have to go, just go. But on the other hand, when you're in school, sometimes you absolutely have to ask to go to the bathroom, that you can't just leave the classroom. If you're in preschool, maybe you can, and so on. So it's an important decision to think about. Do you want the child just to self-initiate and just go to the bathroom when they have to go? Or should they ask first? It will be inconvenient at the beginning if the child is asking to go all the time after their first training. So the first 6 months or a year afterward, and they're asking all the time over and over and over again, um, is something to consider. So again, I generally do not teach the requesting at the beginning. I think requesting is an important skill to learn, but I say you do the toilet training first and then requesting at a later time. Now, who knows at this point? It's July 2020. Will we ever get back to schools? Hopefully we will. And we can do some toilet training in schools. And as a general rule, if the parents and the school team are working together on the toilet training procedures, you will have a much better likelihood of success. So part of what we were going to cover today is toilet training in schools, because there are quite a lot of issues with deciding which type of toilet training to do in schools and what's going to be possible. So there's a big, big difference between what's possible based on the research literature and what is going to be probably successful in schools. Like, can you actually implement those procedures like they were done in the research article? And in a lot of cases, you can't. And if you can't, it's important to really consider what can you do and do the appropriate planning that's going to be necessary in order to be successful. So one thing that I think comes up with the intensive toilet training procedures is, can you really have a staff person spend all day alone in the bathroom with the child? Current and climate, probably not. In the old days, we used to do this all the time. We had many, many kids that learned to toilet train with an intensive toileting procedure in a private little bathroom at the school, and the staff were there with them for 3-5 days a week, and they were successfully toilet trained. In our current environment, with regulations and all kinds of things, and certainly appropriate because of certain horrible abuses that have occurred from time to time, this is becoming less and less likely to be implemented in a public school setting. I've certainly done it. I haven't done it in a very, very long time because it's just simply not allowed. So one of the questions that I would ask is, if you were considering an intensive toileting procedure for an individual in a public school, what requirements would be necessary? Does there have to be a second person there? Is there, whatever appropriate administrative parental consents and so on, parents coming in to do it with the paraprofessional and the teacher, whatever there might be. But it's a strong issue to consider. This is one of the primary obstacles to being able to do any intensive procedure in school, which means that schools are much more likely to use a typical toilet training procedure, which can be extremely effective. And I'm going to go over that in a little bit. Another issue in schools is, where will you do the training? Now, who knows what schools are going to be like with social distancing and masks and so on when we get back to schools. But this was a problem way before that. If you're going to do toilet training, if you're in the preschool, you might be able to do it in the regular bathroom where everybody else is going. But once you've gotten to kindergarten or first grade, you probably can't do that anymore. Probably you need to have a separate bathroom where you're going to participate in toilet training, where you're going to set up with all your supplies and you're going to have adults in there all the time. You probably cannot do that in the same bathroom that all the other kids use. So therefore, this is an important discussion to have with administration and determine where exactly the toilet training will take place. Often they have to block off a staff bathroom for this. I've seen in many, many schools where there are 3 or 4 staff bathrooms. Maybe they block off one if they have a significant number of kids that are going to need toilet training and use that procedures. But it's an important administrative issue to discuss before you actually commit and get started with a toilet training procedure. Okay. Here is another one that comes up. It counts for homes too, but in schools, this can be a particularly bad problem, is what are you going to do when an accident happens? Accidents are inevitable. Nobody is going to learn to put carelessly. You are going to have some accidents during the procedure. So, for example, I was in one school that had one of these preschool rugs, and they didn't want to ruin this rug. You know, that rug cost over $500. Who knew these letters? The letters and number rugs are extremely expensive. It was over $500. So they rolled up the rug, and we had to, sit on these little plastic things that could be wiped off easily. Who's going to clean up? So when there's a toilet accident, are you going to call the custodian every time to mop the floor for you? Or is the paraprofessional going to take out some mops and some sprays and get it all cleaned up? And are there any things that can be ruined in the classroom if there are toileting accidents? Are there any kind of teacher chairs that the kids sit on, or special toys that can't be cleaned and so on? Very, very important issue to consider. So make sure you're prepared for the inevitable. Another issue with the schedule, if you're going to try an intensive training, is can you dramatically change the schedule? So, for example, if you're going to do an intensive training procedure and the child eat lunch in the bathroom, that means we have a little table in the bathroom and you go and you eat lunch there and then you go back to your toilet training, or a snack there, or can the child miss recess? Can the child miss gym? Can the child miss art? And so on. Again, it might only be for a few days. It might only be for a few days, but school regulations and policies and so on, you might not be allowed to do it. So again, it's an important administrative decision and discussion to determine, can you even possibly implement the intensive procedure? Finally, there's the issue of supervision and management of the person doing the toilet. In many, many public school situations, there's a lack of appropriate supervision and training in order to effectively implement the procedure. If you don't have access to the relevant supervision management necessary in order to be successful with the toilet training procedures, your success rate is much less likely. So here is an example of a great article where it's a research article where they successfully trained children in a public school setting to toilet train. And so we'll cover some of these procedures with some added additional resources and suggestions from other articles and other research. So one of the most common things that goes wrong is that we think people can follow written instructions. And the research is just absolutely overwhelming that when you give people written instructions, and not just paraprofessionals, teachers, people in a whole wide variety of professions, not just education, people cannot look at written instructions and be able to go do what it says. Which is why I will not buy anything from IKEA anymore, because their written instructions are absolutely terrible. But even if the instructions are very well written, if they're beautifully written instructions, most people cannot go from reading the instructions to find directions. It requires actual training, modeling, feedback, and so on in order to be successful. So don't be surprised that if your plan involves giving the paraprofessional, oh, here's the procedures you're going to use to train Johnny, and then you're going to expect that paraprofessional to go and train just from having read the procedures, it is simply very, very unlikely to be successful. So in the research that I discussed before, one of the basic things was that it required minimal supervision and training. But there's a big difference between a little bit and zero. Very big difference. So what they did is the staff had 1 hour training that involved role play and feedback. They had on-site supervision the first day of supervision. So the first day, the BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, was actually in the bathroom with the paraprofessional and the child. This is not sitting at a meeting in the conference room. This is a big difference. You are actually, the BCBA is actually in the bathroom with the paraprofessional, ensuring that the treatment is going as expected. Then there was at least a weekly supervision session where the treatment integrity was collected, which essentially means they watched to make sure that the paraprofessional was still following all the steps that were in the treatment plan. And if they weren't, they would give them feedback and said, oh, you know what, you forgot to do step 3, try it like this, and so on. And making sure that they were following the procedures. And finally, if the child wasn't being successful, they did extra tests to make sure. So if you've worked in public schools before, most of you will recognize that this is unusual. That although this is minimal, this is much less than I would prefer, someone like me would prefer, but this is much more than what is typically happens in a public school setting. Typically in a public school setting, they usually give you just the written instructions. But if they give you more than the written instructions and they actually provide some training, it's usually in something like this, where everybody is sitting in a conference room and they're watching somebody like me give a presentation and tell you how to do it. And then they expect you to go do it. Well, that is equally likely to be ineffective as when I give you the written instructions. It actually requires someone going into the classroom, going in and making sure that the staff know how to do it, giving them feedback and giving them multiple opportunities and support in order for them to be successful. In this case, going into the classroom means going into the bathroom. Okay. So one thing I think you might want to consider if you're interested in looking at the procedures, this is the number of days to mastery. And if you look at it, it was a significant amount of time. These are children, all who had language skills, all who could follow some directions. And it still took between 30 to 65 school days. And that's between 72 and 110 calendar days. So it took a significant amount of time for these children to master these skills of toilet training in this research. So this is now, the advantage was it didn't disrupt any of the other school activities. The children can go through their day, follow all the other school activities, but they were working on this a long period of time. Now, if you look at 65 school days, that is a lot of follow-up from BCBAs and from the special education in order to ensure that the child was successful. They probably could have been successful with most of these kids in 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10s of days, and been done with all of the kids much faster, but it would have been a tremendous disruption. So this is the kind of discussion that you have to consider when implementing a toilet training procedure. Now, we're going to generalize the procedures to home. Just because the child is doing it at school is no guarantee that they're going to be able to do it at home. Now, how do schools typically want to generalize the procedures? Well, we're going to do a team meeting. We're going to come in, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you what I do. Maybe I'm going to give you a call on the phone. I'm going to send you an email with the written instructions of how we did it. And that might work sometimes, but a lot of time it's not going to work. Quite a lot of time it's not going to work. What you probably have to do in many cases is have the parent actually come into school, watch how the paraprofessional is running the procedure, or the special education teacher, or whoever is implementing the protocol, and then have the parent do it at school, and then take it and start working at home. And in many cases, I went to the home after we did it in school to help the parent implement in the home setting, because sometimes the generalization does not occur automatically, and it can take some significant work in order to make that happen. Okay, so let's talk about getting started with toilet training. One of the things that you need is a lot of supplies. A lot of supplies. And you want to have everything ready on the first day before you implement the toilet training procedure. So first thing is cleaning supplies. Do you have everything you need to clean up? It should be right there in the bathroom, not hard to find, not, oh, I have to go get it. So mops, sprays, wipes, bottle, rags, everything that you need. Of course, extra clothing and underwear, lots and lots of extra clothing and underwear. Sometimes people say 3 or 4. I want a ton of extra clothing. I want to make sure I have everything I need, and we're going to do laundry all the time to make sure that we never run out. You're going to need timers to know when to take the child to the toilet, when to take them off the toilet, how long to keep them on the toilet, and all of those sorts of things. I recommend you have a standalone timer, not to use the one on your phone. It's your watch. It's likely to be too distracting with texts and so on. So I highly recommend a separate timer. Many kids are little, and if they're going to be sitting on the toilet, they need a stool for their feet, or else it can be very uncomfortable. So a nice footstool is very useful. A potty chair or a toilet seat can be helpful. The potty seats are nice in the sense that you can move them around and so on, and they're small and the child can get on them easily. The problem with those is that it adds an extra step in the training, because eventually you got to teach them to go on the toilet. So it's nice to use the little round toilet seats to actually go on the regular toilet, because it eliminates a whole step that you don't have to do if you start with the toilet seat. So again, I highly recommend using the seats on the toilet, but the potty chairs are a perfectly reasonable alternative. You will need highly preferred reinforcers, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Edible reinforcers with things like iPads and so on are super necessary for the children to learn. This is a very hard skill. This can be a stressful skill. You need the best, most highly preferred reinforcers to use. Now, in addition to that, in addition to your highly preferred reinforcers, it's also helpful to have some things that are enjoyable, but not super highly preferred, like maybe books or coloring books, or things like that that the child can do to keep them engaged, without being the highly preferred reinforcers. Now, in the old days, we used to tell people, don't give them anything. They have to be concentrating. You can't go to the toilet without concentrating, and you don't need them to have any other alternative activities. And that is somewhat true. It is helpful if the child could actually tolerate that, but most kids at 3, 4, 5 years old have a hard time with that. So having some alternative activities that are preferred, but not highly preferred, like the iPad or the candy or something, is generally very beneficial. Now, common problem that comes up is the rewards. And it's not just any rewards. It is the most highly preferred reward. So in the research, they actually tested the rewards in something called a preference assessment to make sure that these rewards were highly approved, highly preferred by the clients in the study. Now, sometimes you run into problems with this. The parents might say, you know what? I don't really want him to have candy, but he really likes apple slices. Can we use apple slices instead of the candy? You might say, you tend to say, oh, sure, if he really likes apple slices, what do I care? It's healthier. That's better. That's wonderful. And that's absolutely true. if the child really, really likes apple slices. But if it's only like the apple slices are sort of, they're okay, I'll eat them, not likely to be successful. The same thing occurs with school health guidelines in the sense of sometimes schools have like healthy eating programs and something, and no candy allowed in school and no cookies allowed in school and those kind of things. I've seen it several times. If that's the case, you need special administrative approval in order to do this, because the most commonly preferred reward for young children in this is edibles. In the study that I gave you before, 4 out of the 5 kids preferred edible rewards more than any of the other rewards. Now, if you have a child that will really, really loves the iPad or something like that, wonderful, wonderful. But most kids, the most highly preferred thing has generally been the animals. In my practice, I've generally tried to eliminate edible rewards as much as possible. I almost never use edible rewards for virtually anything else any longer, unless it's absolutely essential, with the exception of toilet training. For toilet training, most of the time, edible rewards are extremely helpful in order to be successful. The other thing to learn about the rewards is whatever the rewards you select, you have to hold them only for toilet training. So, and typically they recommend don't use those rewards at all for a few days before you start toilet training. So you're going to have to withhold the iPad for 3 days or so before you start the training. And no candy, no cookies, or whatever the highly preferred thing is, you're not going to give any outside of training. If you give some outside of training, you're going to decrease the motivation during the toilet training. So, again, extremely important not to use the rewards outside. Okay, so you've picked your rewards, and now we're trying to find some social interaction that you can use as reinforcers. There's one procedure from the Fox and Nazarene toilet training book that I highly recommend if you have children that have the verbal ability to understand this kind of language. It is amazing how much children like the Friends Who Care procedure. The way the Friends Who Care procedure goes is you can use it as social interaction for participation, for coming to the bathroom, and for sitting, and so on. And it goes like this. You say, Mommy will be so happy when you go in the potty. And Grandma will be so happy when you go in the potty. And Mickey Mouse will be so happy when you go in the potty. And Winnie the Pooh will be so happy when you go in the potty. And Buzz Lightyear will be so happy. And then when the child actually goes, then if you have the little characters, you can hold them up. Oh, Buzz is so happy, and Mickey Mouse is so happy, and Mommy is so happy, and so on. And if the child has the language abilities, almost all 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds think this is hysterically funny, love, love, love this interaction. And so it's generally a very, very highly successful part of the toilet training procedures. So if the child has the appropriate verbal language to use this, I highly recommend it. One of the common questions that come up is, can I keep the diapers on while we're doing the training? Well, I don't want it to mess up the couch or the carpeting or or whatever the space may be. I say no. Don't leave diapers on during training. Now, having said that, it's totally fine if you're in the middle of the training and you have a 2-hour drive to do and you don't want to mess up your whole car. Fine. Put a diaper or pull up on while you have a long car drive, or you're not doing training today. You know what? I'm not feeling well. I'm not doing the training. Fine. Put the diaper on today. We'll go back to training tomorrow. No problem. But If you put diapers on and try and use the pull-ups to go up and down, the child does not get the feeling of doing it appropriately. And the research seems to be overwhelming that when you try and use diapers during the training, it will take dramatically longer to successfully train children to use the toilet example. So if it's at all possible, once you start, no diapers. If you need be, maybe you wear diapers at night, or if you have a special long car drive or something like that. But in general, once you start, diapers are done. Another common issue that comes up is the clothing. As a general rule, do not have any sort of buttons, snaps, zippers, anything unnecessary at the start of training. Just use underwear, or you can use sweatpants and underwear if you're in school, for example. But don't use anything that requires buttons and snaps. And some of the kids have all these like cute little clothes that have all these snaps and buttons and zippers and all these things that make it difficult. We will get to that. You will eventually train them to use all those clothes, but don't create an obstacle. When they have an urge to go and they try and get the pants off and then they're stuck with the button, just don't do that. You will go through the process and you will be dramatically more successful if you pull them down, pull them up. Now, one thing that comes up is when children are learning to pull up their pants and pull down their pants. One of the things that comes up is that children have trouble with this. So, like, for example, I was one time doing a toilet training situation, and a child was just about done. The child had mastered it within a few days. We did a sort of a modified intensive procedure. It really only took a few days. He was very successful. I was doing a follow-up with mom. And I said, Mom, so how's it going? And she says, oh, it's going beautifully. But there is a little bit of a problem. When he picks up his pants, he can't get them all the way up. He's pulling and pulling and pulling, and he just can't get the pants up. And I said, oh, okay. Well, that's a problem that we can handle usually very easily. What we teach a child to do is take their hand and turn it backwards and go over their butt and pick it up that way from behind. Preschoolers sometimes have the butt that sticks out and they can't get it up. And so just picking up, and we tried it, and he got it within 1 or 2 practices, and it was beautiful. And so those are little tricks in the trade, things like that, that if you've been doing it a long time, you learn, or that some of these things that was directly out of the Fox and Azrin manual is how I learned that little trick. But that is one thing at the beginning you might want to know, because even with the sweatpants, picking them up, putting them down, sometimes children with some motor issues might have some difficulty with it. And learning that from behind, facing backward, pick up and over is sometimes a much more effective procedure of picking up the pants than trying to do it on the sides how you might naturally do it. One of the obvious sorts of issues that come up is you have to get enough opportunities to learn. Any skill that you're only going to use 1 or 2 or 3 times a day is obviously going to be more difficult to learn than if you have to use the skill 10 or 15 times per day. So what we want at the beginning is lots and lots of opportunities to learn. So in order to make sure that we have lots of opportunities to learn, we give some extra fluids. And what I'm talking about is maybe 1 extra glass of water, or a little bit of extra highly preferred beverage, like some juice or something like that, lemonade, that kind of thing, to make sure that we have enough opportunity to learn. Now, it's very important that when you're giving extra fluids, if you're not getting enough output, it's okay to give a little bit more, but it's very important not to overdo the extra fluids. There are some cases of medical issues that can be caused by over drinking, and like encouraging the kids to drink too much can cause some medical issues. So it's very, very important. But an extra cup of water or a juice or two is usually absolutely fine. Again, this is one of the issues that you might check when you do your medical checkup. But as long as you don't go crazy overdoing it, I think you should be fine. Okay? Then as soon as the child starts being successful going to the potty, or in the bathroom, you want to discontinue those extra fluids and just offering fluids at natural times that you might give them, like at a snack time or a lunch time or something like that, and not encouraging the extra fluids after they're no longer necessary. Okay, schedule. So most toilet training procedures are going to involve some sort of schedule. And there's a whole wide variety of ways to do it. The way this was done in the school research is the one I'm using as the basis, is the child was given instruction to go to the bathroom every 30 minutes. The child sits for a maximum of 3 minutes. You don't really want them to sit there too long because you don't want them to get used to it as like a game and so on. So it's better if they learn when you sit, you go, and then you get off the toilet. Now, there could be a whole wide variety of variations where kids are sitting longer. In the intensive procedures, the kids are typically sitting in a chair next to the toilet, and they just go immediately back and forth and so on. Graduated guidance. What does graduated guidance mean for going to the bathroom? If the child doesn't go immediately, we're going to just use some gentle encouragement with the least amount of prompting necessary. So maybe you just say, okay, go to the bathroom, or maybe a little gentle guide to the bathroom. Because remember, we've already talked about this. If the child's not cooperative with the procedure, you're going to have done something about cooperation and with problem behaviors before you started. And then social praise. And oh, wow, the Friends Who Care procedure. Mickey Mouse would be so happy. Buzz Lightyear would be so happy. Generally, this is an essential part of the procedure, because if you're not going on a regular basis and practicing, you're not likely to acquire the skills. Okay. One thing that, again, this is out of the Fox and Azrin toilet training book, that if the child has the relevant prerequisite skills of language and imitation and so on to benefit from this, this is often highly, highly effective. So what you would do is you would run through the entire sequence of toilet training with the doll. So you take the doll, and maybe the doll is sitting in circle time with you, or maybe if you're at home, the doll is having a snack with you and your child, right? And you take, all right, let's go to the bathroom. And you walk the doll to the bathroom, and the doll sits on the potty, pull the pants down, sit on the potty, and then the dolls have these things where you push the button and stomach, something like that. The doll actually goes, and then everybody can cheers, and then you can use the Friends Who Care procedure. Mickey Mouse would be so happy. And you use the Friends Who Care procedure, you praise, and then you give the reward to the doll, right? And kids, a lot of kids, if they have the appropriate language and imitation and play skills necessary, sometimes love the whole procedure, and they're learning a lot from it. So you do this, not a lot. I'm not saying, I think you do this no more than maybe 5 times, 10 times at the most, just to give the experience of showing what the procedure is like and what happens during the procedure. And again, if the kids have the relevant skills, highly effective. Another intervention that is extremely helpful for the kids who have the relevant prerequisite skills is video modeling. There are commercially made videos which are probably not quite as good. They use a specific animation that demonstrated in each part of the procedure. And again, if the child have the relevant prerequisite skills, it can be highly effective to use videos as part of the training procedure. Okay. Another sense of procedure that is extremely helpful is the dry pants procedure. So The dry pants procedure involves checking the child frequently to determine if they're dry or not, and providing rewards contingent on staying dry. So you teach the child to take their hands and touch their underwear, and say, is it? And the child obviously has to have the language skills to know dry from wet, or even if they don't, they'll probably pick it up during the procedure. Wow, you stay dry, and providing rewards contingent on staying dry, which is, and praise in the friends who care procedure contingent on staying dry, is an extremely effective part of the intervention. Okay, so now we're going to go to the bathroom. And now we're going to follow the steps. Now, in the procedure used in the school, they used verbal prompts, but if you have a learner that needs other types of prompts, that is fine, you know. So it's go to the bathroom, lights on, close the door, pants down, sit on the toilet, stay if needed, pants up, wash hands, lights off, boom. Praising or friends who care, positive interaction for each step in the procedure. And in this study, they thought that the students benefited from some reminders of the rewards, so maybe holding up the rewards, say, first P, then M&Ms, or something along those lines. And you're going to follow that procedure each time for the entire of the day, every 30 minutes until you're getting success. All right, here's one of the things that comes up during toilet training. It requires like focus and attention. So this is a direct quote from the research article. Staff carefully observed for any urinary output. Think about what that means a little bit. Carefully observed for any urinary output. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but the research is very, very clear that reinforcement works best if it's immediate. At the exact second the thing that you want happens is when you want the reinforcement to be delivered. And if you deliver the reinforcement late, you're not going to be as successful. So it requires some observation, and so that you can watch and be ready at the exact second to reinforce, boom, and you have to be quick. You have to be super, super fast. If you're not fast, the procedure will take longer for the child to learn. Reinforcement works best when it's immediate. And when I say immediate, I mean even a delay of a second or two messes up a little bit of the effect. You want it to be at the exact second the thing that you want is happening, that you want to happen again. That's when you want to provide the reinforcement and the praise. Wow, thank you. That's so awesome. So it's hard to do. It's hard to keep your focus and your attention on this, and it's uncomfortable in schools and so on. So this is really where some training can be extremely helpful. So if we were in person together, what I would do at this point is I would do a little exercise demonstrating how you learn to do the training, how you learn to use prompting and baiting and reinforcement and so on. And if you don't have that background, I'm not going to be able to deliver that to you today, but there are other trainings available. But I suggest that if you have a difficult to teach learner in particular, that you're going to want a BCBA or experienced special education teacher or somebody along those lines to help provide the training necessary for prompting, reinforcement, baiting to work successfully. And a large part of that is going to be learning how to observe carefully and reinforce at just the right moment. Okay. So the next thing that people want to know is, well, okay, I think I got it, but what happens if there's an accident? Well, do I use punishment? What do I do? And the general consequence for using a not using the toilet appropriately for going in your pants. It's just neutral for you. If you're wet, you have to go change. They guided the child back to the bathroom, and the paraprofessional helped them change their clothes neutrally. They're trying not to look. They're they're trying not to provide a lot of attention. They're certainly not using all care procedure and so on. They're just very neutral about it. You set the timer 30 minutes later, and then we'll come back and we will. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the use of punishment in programs of toy training for children with autism and other developmental disabilities. First, I'd like to start off with just a disclaimer in the sense that when I'm using punishment now, I'm using the everyday definition of punishment, what everyday people think of as punishment. I'm not using the technical definition of punishment in the cognitive behavior analysis. We know the difference, but for the BCBAs who are purists, I want to just clarify that point. I'm talking about what everyday people think of punishment. Well, the most common punishment that was used in a lot of the research literature and practice was a positive practice procedure or correction procedure where if the child had an accident, what the person would do, the parent or the therapist would say, no pee in your pants or something like that, a firm reprimand. Then they would take the child to the potty quickly, pull down their pants, put them on the potty, pick up their pants, help them, prompting them to do it, and walk back and forth. And that could have been done anywhere from 1 or 2 times to 10 times, depending on the different studies and the procedures. And then sometimes if it was a mess, they would also go and help physically clean up the mess, change their clothes, and so on. And the procedure was quite effective as part of an overall package of training procedures. Now, there are several things about that. First of all, more of the recent research suggests that punishment may not be an essential part of the treatment package. If we're talking about the use of punishment in everyday language, there's a good chance that you might be able to use other procedures that are effective without the need for punishment procedures. The second thing I would say is if the training is being done in a public school, even if you have consent, even if the parent really wants the procedure to be used, which some parents do, because some parents have read the articles, they've seen presentations, and they know that this procedure is research-based and demonstrated to be effective. If the training is going to be done in a public school, in my view, you should not attempt to use this procedure in a public school, simply because people will not understand. People will not understand. The janitor walks by, the parent sees the kid in the hallway, or other kids see by accident the procedure happening. We try and do it in a quiet area, but that doesn't always work, and so on. You just cannot have people seeing the procedure because they won't understand it. So if you were going to implement the procedure, I would suggest this should be done with a parent. Parent being the implementer of the procedure, and pretty much only if the parent was really insistent on the use of the procedure. But now, I'm even less inclined to do that currently because I don't think it's necessary if you followed my advice from the beginning of the presentation. What was that advice? That advice was don't start toilet training until you have good instructional control, until the child has very, very low levels of behavior problems. When the child willingly participates in a wide variety of tasks, that's when you start toilet training. If you have that, if you have a child who is a willing participant, who has reduced behavior problems significantly, the use of these types of procedures are no longer necessary. And now, it might have been necessary 10, 20, 30 years ago, but with the development of the technology of effective treatment of problem behavior, I believe that these procedures are no longer necessary. And not that they might not be necessary for one or two particularly really extreme sorts of situations, but I believe we can do without these. So what are some alternative procedures we can use? Well, an alternative procedure that I think has some good promise is the distraction procedure, startle and distraction. So when the child starts to have an accident, if you can startle them and get them to stop for a second. Oh, wait. Don't go yet. Quick, let's go, quick. Get them. And then if you get even just a little tiny bit in the toilet, wow, that's awesome. And you provide the reinforcement. And if the child didn't make it and you didn't get any in the toilet, okay, you just don't reinforce at that time. And I have found this procedure to be highly acceptable to school district employees and to parents, and effective. It works. So the key is you gotta, again, that procedure of observe very carefully. And as soon as you see the tiniest little bit, see if you startle the child with, wait, wow, you're doing it. All right, let's go quickly. And you do that loud and you do it quickly. A lot of times the kids will stop. And then by the time they get to the toilet, they're like, oh, okay. And then they can just go, and it gives you the opportunity to reinforce a correct response. I think this is the procedure of choice for in my practice currently. Okay. So one thing that we haven't talked about yet is the data. It's absolutely essential that you collect data as in any applied behavior analysis program. You want to collect data on if there are accidents, if there are successful urinations, of course, maybe if the child is initiating or requesting, but there's several reasons why I think the data is absolutely essential in toilet training. One is you want to see how many opportunities you've had. Sometimes you haven't been successful just because you haven't had an opportunity. Sometimes maybe there was a success on the first day or the second day, and then you might have a day or two where you haven't had too much success. Looking at the data can show you that, all right, we're going to get this. We're going to get this. We're going to get this. It also shows you when, you know what, maybe there's a problem in the procedures and we need to do something to make some changes to make the program more effective and more successful. So highly recommend that the absolute essential procedure of collecting data be trained and focused on during the treatment. Okay, so assuming that the child has been successful, you are getting a lot of successful urinations in the toilet. Now what we want to start to do is start to make the procedures more profitable. One is, if you're going to the bathroom every 30 minutes, maybe start reducing that a little, every 45 minutes, every hour. The other thing is you don't want to be giving rewards. You can't give M&Ms every single time you go to the potty, or Skittles every single time. You want to start reducing that. And maybe you go every other time, or every third time, or every fifth time, and so on, until you're steadily reducing the level of reinforcement and the frequency of the reminders to go to the bathroom, or else the procedure just is not going to be practical in the long run. Okay. You will not automatically get generalization. So what is usually necessary is some prompting and some reminders when you're in new situations, in new locations, at the store, at grandma's house. Babysitter comes and all of a sudden won't go until you come back from the store or wherever you went. At daycare, you trained at one bathroom in school doesn't necessarily mean they'll be willing to go at another bathroom in school. So just giving with a wide variety of people, caregivers, and a wide variety of places is an essential part of the training. Okay, so now the child is going and the child has been successful, but they don't go unless you tell them. That's where we are at this point. Well, sometimes the self-initiation is taught as part of the whole training sequence, and sometimes it's taught after. I've been leaning more and more towards teaching it as a separate skill afterward. And you want the child just to go. Like, I'm busy. You can just go to the toilet. You don't have to tell me when you're going. Just go. So how do you go about training that skill? Well, this can be done as just another step in the process where you're sitting with a child, and instead of if you're going to give the reminder every hour at this point, maybe at 55, 56 minutes, you slowly nudge or just give a tiny little prompt and slowly, slowly remove your prompts until the child goes without, and then you provide a major reinforcement. Some kids, if the child has enough language, you can explain to them, look, you can earn a special reinforcer. I'm not going to remind you anymore. You can provide a special, if the child doesn't have the language, they can still learn to self-initiate. It's not an obstacle, obviously. Children have language are likely to learn the procedures faster, but it can be done. But it's an essential part of the training. If you have to continually remind the child at 6, at 9, at 12, at 14 years of age, it's a huge problem. So the slow, steady removal of the prompts when you do your reminders is an essential part of the training to get those independent self-initiations. The same thing with requesting. People will sometimes have different opinions on the exact point in the training that you should teach a child to request. Some people, again, recommend request training from the very beginning. As soon as you started the training, you're teaching requesting at the same time. I typically do not do that. I typically recommend the request training as a separate skill development after the child is already pretty good at the skill of using the toilet. But either way, now this is an absolutely essential component because sometimes you can't just go. Sometimes you're in school and you have to ask. You can't just leave the classroom. Sometimes you're in places like maybe if you're at the mall or you're at a restaurant or something, and the child can't independently go without asking. This is also going to depend on their level of communication. Are they using a communication device of some sort? Are they using a speech generating device? Are they using vocal language? Are they using PECS or sign language or so on? So that's, of course, an essential component of deciding how to do the training. But otherwise, the procedures are pretty similar. You're going to do it at the moment that you think the child is most likely to need to use the bathroom, even if it's when the child's already walking to the bathroom to go and you know they have to go, and then you can sort of insert it then. Some children, extra rewards are helpful. So I've seen several children who had trouble, even without reminders, they would hold the urine for hours and hours and hours if you don't remind them, but they still would not ask to go until you told them to go. So in those cases, I have sometimes found an extra reward for asking can be extremely effective. And of course, you're going to get too much asking at first, and you're going to have to fade off those rewards. And if you need assistance, you can get assistance from a qualified BCBA. But this is an essential part of the training procedures. Okay, let's say you're done with training. The child's successful, they're requesting, they're self-initiating, they're going to the bathroom. Everything is absolutely beautiful. Sometimes you get a little bit of a regression. Now, there are several things that could go on. People could accidentally reinforce the behavior, for example, by yelling at the child, and the child thinks it's funny when mom gets upset and so on. Or you could have some sort of medical problem that comes up that causes some accidents. And those things are relatively rare. Most of the time that doesn't happen. But there's one problem that comes up after training that is extremely common that I think is worth addressing. And that is when the child is highly, highly engaged in a very preferred activity. So if the child is playing with their iPad, or they're outside running around on the playground, and they probably know they have to go because they've been successfully trained and there hasn't been an accident in 2 months, and they know what they're doing. They are very successful with the procedure. But if they're busy, if especially engaged in a highly, highly preferred activity, you still sometimes have. I've seen this over and over again. And my recommendation for this is to simply train for it before it happens. So if you're going to do, let's say you're up to, say, 90 minutes before you do your reminder, and the child is starting to self-initiate, maybe, and the child is starting to ask, maybe 85 minutes. Put them on a highly, highly preferred activity like an iPad or video game or TV show, a favorite TV show, whatever it might be, and prompt them to stop in the middle and learn to come away from highly, highly preferred activities. This one procedure is very, very likely to prevent those small little regressions that happen over time. Okay. Now, sometimes people say, well, my child doesn't really care if he stays shy. He'll just sit in it. It doesn't seem to bother him at all. So the important thing is that that is not a problem for the initial parts of training. For the initial parts of training, no problem. You can continue to be successful with toy training even if the child has no interest and the child doesn't care. But eventually, you need the procedures to come under natural contingencies. And the natural contingencies mean is essentially that nobody has planned it, that the child just goes to the bathroom because they want to. And here are some, common reasons why the child might want to be, they want to stay away. Or they know that if they have an accident, they're going to change and they probably won't be able to participate in their karate class or their gym class or their school or whatever it might be, or simply not wanting to be embarrassed because eventually kids understand that other kids don't do this. And it's embarrassing. And why is that essential? Because that's the way the real world works. In the real world, nobody goes and gives you a Skittle. Nobody goes and gives you an M&M after you go to bed. That's fine at the beginning. That's fine for the first week, the first month, or the first 2 months. But eventually, all of those contingencies, all of those reminders, all of those reinforcers, everything has to be gone. And eventually, the child has to do it for a natural reason. If you don't get to this point, in my view, you are not finished. You have to get it that the only reason why the child is going is for a natural reason without any of the prejudice. Which is why I said at the beginning, I'm not necessarily concerned if you do it in a day or a week or 3 weeks or so on, however long it takes. This is the criteria for success, that you have everything occurring naturally without any reinforcers. Okay, now I did mention at the beginning that some learners are more difficult to teach. So all of the procedures that we've talked about so far are likely to be helpful, more or less, depending upon the child's level of skill. But there are certain other procedures that might be necessary or extremely helpful for the more difficult to teach learners. And so we're going to cover some of those now. The key point is your procedures have to be both effective and practical. So don't put the child in a procedure that you know is not likely to be effective. Don't put them in a typical interval sort of training procedure where you're going to go every 30 minutes. If you know the child has more significant language development issues or imitation issues, it's not likely to be effective. But at the same time, it has to be practical. You have to be able to implement the procedures where the child is and at the time the child is. So if you're in a public school and it's not practical to do the intensive procedures, you have to be honest and say that and figure out some sort of alternative arrangement in order to make the procedure successful. Being both effective and practical is your goal. It's absolutely essential. Okay. So Asrin and Fox are famous for the original research on highly successful toilet training. So I don't cite the original study. I've been showing you the article, the original study. I don't use the original article for Asrin and Fox simply because they use some words in the original article from 1971 that wouldn't be considered appropriate today. But the key thing is that these people were very difficult to train. First of all, they were adults. They weren't children. They were adults. They had been in the hospital for many years, some as long as 45 years. All had IQ scores of less than 30, several major medical problems and major physical problems. 5 of the 9 were completely nonverbal. All, or many of them, had had attempts at training, which none had been successful. And the training for these individuals who've been in the hospital for years with IQs less than 30, 5 of 9 with zero speech, training took between 1 and 14 days with an average of 6 days. 7 of the 9 participants of the study had almost zero accidents after just 12 days, and the other 2 still improved more over the next few months. So the point of showing you this is that, one, these procedures are highly successful. They've been replicated many times, but also, in all likelihood, your child does not have the level of need that Adrin and Fox was dealing with in 1971. Even if they have the same, maybe a similar disability to some of those individuals. Adrin and Fox were working in a large institutional setting that I'm not even sure, I don't think those kind of institutional settings even really exist anymore. I worked in one in the early 1990s, and so I know what those like. So I visited the one where Adrin and Fox worked for the original research, and I was at that unit in graduate school. So I understand what those places are like. I worked in a different one. Your child has almost certainly abundantly more resources. They have parents that are willing to assist. They have school districts where we have IDEA now. So in all likelihood, if Aspen and Fox can do it in 1971, we can do it today. We also have better technology. They developed some of the technology. The technology today is much better. Okay. So this is just an article, a much more recent article, where researchers replicated the Asrin and Fox research with a little bit lower intensity, slightly modified some of the procedures. But the key thing is that they took children with autism that had failed in learning to be toilet trained, despite having training. So they had training. You know what? This isn't effective. This isn't effective. And once they weren't into the more intense procedures, they were effective. So again, it just shows that even if you've tried to be successful teaching children with autism to toilet train, and you were not successful, there's an excellent chance that you will be able to do it. Here's another article. This article is a little bit different because this is, again, taking the Asrin and Fox protocol, but this is a large group of students. I think it was maybe 30 students, and they showed the overwhelming majority were dramatically effective with a modified version or versions of the Asrin and Fox procedures. So again, in all likelihood, the students will be successful with this procedure if it's implemented properly. Okay, so what is different about the Asrin and Fox procedure than some of the more typical procedures that we were talking about? Okay, so here's one of the most important ones. when you go to the bathroom, in the original research I showed you for public schools and for kids with sort of mild impairments, the children sat on the toilet for 3 minutes. Then, boom, they get up. Well, for kids with more difficult to learn, more difficult to teach learners, in all likelihood, they will have to sit on the toilet longer than 3 minutes. And sometimes the addition of an escape contingency is necessary. And what that means is that you're going to just sit there and wait. And this time is sometimes slowly built up, sometimes it's a set time, and so on. There are different possible ways to do this. But the key is that you're sitting there and you're waiting to capture an opportunity where the child went. Remember what I said? The researchers observed carefully for any urinary output. So you're watching carefully and you're waiting for the exact second to cheer and provide praise and provide reinforcement and put that Skittle right in the mouth as quickly as you possibly can for them to understand that the going to the bathroom and the toilet leads to the reinforcement. And then, as soon as you've done that, then you take a break. You get up, you do something else for a couple minutes, usually still in the bathroom, right? Usually still in the bathroom, like maybe an iPad or some other toys or whatever it is, and then you go back after a few minutes, go back for the next opportunity. So this is a big difference from the previous procedure where the kids went to the bathroom every 30 minutes, they sat for 3 minutes, whether you go or not, boom, you're right back to class in the preschool or the kindergarten or wherever you're going. This procedure, you're sitting there for a longer period of time, and it could be a long time. It could be 30 minutes, it could be 40 minutes. So you were sitting for a long period of time, you're looking to catch it, and boom, use that as an opportunity to reinforce the get up. And again, the same thing, that you don't give the child the most highly preferred items while they're on the toilet. It's books, it's coloring books, it's little toys, but whatever the most highly preferred items are, those items are saved for after you've had a cartoonation. So this procedure is essential. This procedure is likely one of the parts of the procedure that will make it successful for kids who are more difficult to teach as opposed to other children. The second part of the procedure that is essential is the amount of time you're working on it per day. So I have seen, 6 hours recommended. I've seen 8 hours, 6 hours, just simply because school days are 6 hours, and we used to try and do the intensive toilet training in schools and done it successfully in schools. Now, very, very hard, as I discussed at the beginning, very, very hard to get approvals to do the extended training in school. But again, this is a hard day. If this is your job, if you're a behavior therapist, then you have 6 or 7 hours to sit in the toilet with somebody. It's a hard day. If you're the parent, can you sit in the bathroom for 6, 7, 8 hours and really intensely work on this? If you can, you'll probably be done in 5 to 10 days, maybe even less, maybe a couple days more. It's hard to say exactly, but this is the key obstacle. Can you work on this for a long, long period of time? This requires drinking a lot, so you have lots and lots of opportunities to practice. But this is another key difference between the procedures for children who are learning in school with a more moderate procedure and kids who are learning with the intensive procedure. This gives you many, many more opportunities to learn. And if the opportunities are so spread out, it's much, much harder to acquire skill. So again, this is another part of the procedure that I think is probably absolutely essential in order to be successful. Now, part of the procedure that is probably not essential, but extremely helpful, is underwear alarms. Underwear alarms where the alarm, so that if the child has an accident when they're wearing their underwear or their pants, you know instantly because the alarm goes off and boom, it gives you the signal to to do something about it. Usually the startle procedure, or if you were going to do the practice procedure, whatever it might be. Now, Fox and Azrin had these in 1971, so the technology is available, and there are more modern technology things that you can buy for this in order to make this more successful. The research on this is sort of so-so, whether this is an absolutely essential part of the procedure or whether you can do without it. But in general, most people think that it is very, very helpful and is likely to lead to faster acquisition because you're catching the accidents faster, and it allows you to give another opportunity to learn. Okay, so now your learner has been successful. Your learner is generalized. They are using the bathroom successfully. Now maybe they're a little bit older and we're going to restaurants. We're starting to go places a little bit more independently. You'd like them when you go to a restaurant, for example, to be able to use the bathroom independently. You'd like to say, go to the bathroom. If we're ever allowed to go to restaurants again, that is, but assuming we're allowed to go to restaurants again at some points in the future, and you're sitting at the restaurant and you'd like your child to go to the restaurant independently, or they're at school and we'd like someone not to have to go into the boys' room or the girls' room with them. We'd like them to do that completely on their own. How do you train that? Well, there are several things. For most learners, or for many learners, my general recommendation is to use the stall. So you train going into the stall, closing the door, use the toilet, get completely dressed back up before you come out of the stall. Then you go and you wash your hands and you leave. Okay? That is usually the easiest and most effective procedure for many learners when you're using a public restroom that many people might come in. You also might have to train things like avoiding distractions, not staring at people, not bumping into people, and so on. If you have a learner where using the urinal is desired and considered an important part of their protocol, this will require some extra training for many individuals. There are a whole wide variety of obstacles to teaching this effectively. I would generally withhold this sort of training for most individuals that do not understand rules, that you have to understand basic if-then logic. So what I mean by that is there are two different types of learning. So one type of learning is you learn from experience. So if you think about when you learn to drive a car and you hit the brakes, and you went too forward, and eventually from just the feeling of it, you learn to hit the brakes at the just right amount. But you're not hitting forward and you're not stopping short. You're hitting the brakes but nobody can really tell you how hard to hit the brakes. You have to just learn that from experience. And all of our learners are able to do that type of learning from experience. But there's some types of things that you have to learn that you can only learn from rules. You can't really learn from experience. So an example of that might be stopping at a red light. You knew to stop at a red light long before you ever got behind the wheel of the car. You knew you have to stop at a red light and you can go at the green light. You did not learn to stop at a red light because you went through many red lights and you said, sometimes I get tickets when I go through a red light. Sometimes I get in accidents when I go through a red light. No, you learned it because someone told you the rule. Using a urinal is not an experiential-based learning opportunity. It's a rule-based learning opportunity. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to tell people the rules about how far to pull your pants down, don't pull your pants down, open it up, don't stare, and so on. Don't go too close to people, don't touch people, don't stare at people, and on and on. setting up the rules and effectively training. So usually this will require someone to go with the child in the community or the young adult to successfully master the skill. And if for the right learner, certainly can be appropriate. Another common obstacle that comes up in using public restrooms is fear of these automatic toilets or the hand dryers. I've seen both. And how to successfully overcome that can be a challenge. One of the things that I recommend is slowly building up the difficulty. We call it desensitization. And one of the ways that I find effective is little audio tapes or audio tapes. We used to use audio tapes. Now you would probably take a little video on your phone, and I would have the child watch it with the volume all the way down, and then slowly increasing the volume until the child learns to tolerate it on the video, and then slowly providing reinforcement for gradual exposure to it in the actual natural setting, and those procedures have generally been effective. It can take some time, but just the slow, gradual buildup that makes the procedure effective. Okay. Now, when you're going into a single bathroom, you have a potential problem because the person has to learn to go in and lock the door, and they have to know that if they go in and there's someone using the toilet, they have to back out because people forget to lock the door and people sometimes don't knock and so on. So this procedure is what we call the knock and lock rule. And again, this is for learners who have some rule following. If the learner doesn't have rule following, probably going to need some assistance for at least a good while in being able to acquire the skill. But we teach the learners to knock. If someone says, pretty much, if it's a single-use bathroom, someone says anything, you just wait. Wait till the person comes out, and then you can go in. If no one goes in, you have to go in the bathroom, and you have to immediately lock the door. People are gonna just, knock, and if our kids don't say anything when they're in the bathroom, people are gonna just walk in on them. So they have to learn to immediately lock the door after they go into the bathroom. And that's not an always easy thing because there's a whole wide variety of different types of locks. Some of the locks you have to turn, some of them you have to push. Sometimes it's not easy to tell whether you actually locked it or you didn't lock it. There are different types of knobs and so on that can be difficult. So this might require some multiple exemplar training. You might have to go to some different locations to experience some different types of locks in order to make sure that you have generalization to a wide variety of bathroom locks. Okay, the same sort of situation occurs with washing hands. I one time had a learner that had some difficulty with this because there were, in his neighborhood where he lived, some of the bathrooms in the community and places that he went had widely different sinks. Sometimes there was an automatic sink where you put your hands under the water and it starts to go. Sometimes have those buttons and then you have to do it sort of quickly. Some have a cold and a hot with knobs and so on. And I found that it took quite a lot of multiple exemplars, and we had to go to quite a lot of different bathrooms until I could be reasonably sure we could go into any bathroom and we would be able to successfully wash his hands. So this is, and again, he had been toilet trained for many years, but this was sort of an advanced level skill for a learner that was, essentially nonverbal. But it can be done, and it was done successfully. Okay, another problem that sometimes kids have when they learn to use the bathroom independently is they get a little sloppy with getting dressed. So now, remember, we started with just sweatpants. But, kids are not going to wear sweatpants forever. They might have pants with buckles, flies, and They sometimes will walk out of the bathroom a little disheveled. And so what we have taught kids several times is just a check your appearance procedure, a self-management procedure of checking your appearance before you leave the bathroom. So this is done first by starting, does the child know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? So that should be tucked in, should it not be tucked in, should put your fly up, and so on. And we're giving examples and non-examples until we're absolutely sure the child knows this is the correct way, this is the incorrect way. Then we have them record themselves whether they checked and whether they did it the right way or the wrong way. And if they did it the wrong way, they fix themselves. And then eventually, you of course provide reinforcement for success and prompts and error corrections or inappropriate responses. And then slowly fading this until where you're doing it, where you're waiting outside of the bathroom for the child and to do it, and then slowly fading that out until the child does this automatically without any reinforcement. For many children, this can be an essential part of social skills and being able to participate is if they can't go into the bathroom without getting dressed appropriately and looking appropriate when they come out, it's going to be socially stigmatizing. I've seen a couple of learners who were doing quite well socially, but still needed some significant work on this procedure. To really be able to be independent in the bathroom was essential for social integration. And these are kids who really were at a level where they were truly making friends in third, fourth, fifth grade, but still needed some work on this type of skill. Some children, you want to send them to the bathroom, but they don't read, or they read at a lower level than would be necessary. And even if they do read, sometimes bathroom signs in the modern world are not exactly clear. So they can be facing different directions. There can be all kinds of different things used to determine which bathroom you should enter. And so it's highly recommended, again, that you do multiple exemplar training, that you have shown children the wide variety of signs so that they know when they go into at least their favorite places or the places that they visit most commonly, they will know how to be successful in going into the appropriate bathroom. All right, we haven't even mentioned the big one, bowel training. So urine training is sometimes very, very easy, and the bowel training can sometimes take a little bit longer. First thing I'd say is that the same procedures that we used for the urination training are generally effective for the bowel training too, which is great, but bowel training has a couple of obstacles that make it a little bit more challenging. So the first of those obstacles is that you have many, many fewer opportunities to train. In the sense of, so where a urine training, you can provide liquids and you might go 5, 10, 15 times. You get lots and lots of opportunities to practice. In bowel training, you likely only have 1, 2, maybe 3, if you're lucky, opportunities per day. And so it is much, much more difficult to train just because of less opportunities. The second problem is that some children have a little bit of a fear of having a bowel movement in the toilet. And so that might be part of what has to be overcome. And that is overcome the same way that the other way we talked about in terms of the dryers or the automatic toilets or other fears, is just slowly building up the difficulty. And then a third problem that comes up with bowel training is that a lot of kids with autism, and quite frankly, typically developmental can do this too, is they start to get ritualistic procedures that they use when they have to have a bowel movement. So I've seen older kids who were, older, 12, 13 years of age, that were completely toilet trained and would go change out of their clothes, go get into a pull-up, and go to the corner every time they had to have a bowel movement, and they would not go outside of that ritualistic procedure. So there are a few things you can do is if you have one of these things, one of these problems. The first thing I would recommend is that you take some data and you know what the signs are. Almost all of the kids will have some signs when they have to go to the bathroom. It might not be as obvious as my friend who got changed independently into a pull-up and went in the corner, but there almost always are some signs that you can tell when this is likely to happen. Then you're going to use a systematic shaping procedure, just like we talked about with the hand dryers and so on. And you're going to make it a little bit closer to the part, a little bit closer to the toilet, eventually sitting, and so on until you get independent. You're going to save some major reinforcement for success of going in the toilet. And again, the same procedures that we use for urination are going to be successful for bowels. It's just you might have to overcome the fear, you might have to come some of the ritualistic behaviors, and it's going to take a little bit longer simply because you're going to have less opportunities to be successful, but it will work. Okay, now going on to nighttime training. So here's where we are. You've been successful. The child is toilet trained for the most part. They initiate, they're requesting, they're bowel trained. Everything is going beautifully, but they can't stay dry all night. Now again, one we talked about at the beginning, but just as a reminder, you might want to get a medical checkup just to make sure that there's nothing wrong, that there's no medical reason why they're unable to stay dry overnight. I would mention that lots and lots of kids, after they are trained during the day, nighttime training is not needed. That in many, many cases, all you have to do is train during the day and do nothing, and the children are automatically trained at night. Maybe you remind them to go to the bathroom before they go to sleep and so on. But in some cases, special training is needed. So what I recommend is, as a first step, a simple procedure of simply getting a alarm for the bed. They sell these alarm systems that you put under the mattress, and when it gets wet, it wakes the child up, and they go to the bathroom at that point. And that usually combined with a reward in the morning if there was success for staying dry at night, can sometimes be really successful, because sometimes it's just a matter of the automatic training of your body to wake yourself up when you have to go to the bathroom, to just get up, walk to the bathroom, and come back. Of course, you want to individually look at the child and say, are there other obstacles in terms of, like, are they afraid of the dark, and do you need a night light, and those sorts of issues that might come up. But this is a relatively simple procedure that will work frequently. A lot of the time you can be successful with just these two interventions and successfully train at night. Now, if you have not been successful training at night, there are other procedures, and the dry bed method by Asrin, who is the same from Asrin and Fox, who developed the original toilet training procedures, have a nighttime training procedure that is also extremely intense, dramatically effective. And what this procedure involves is actually giving drinks in the evening and making it so the child will have to go to the bathroom at night, and training them to get up and go to the bathroom. Well, it involves several procedures in terms of getting woke up at night, cleaning up the accident themselves, and so on, and going back and forth. Same sort of correction sorts of procedures that are involved in this. If the simpler sort of procedures didn't work, a more intense um, dry bed procedure is a strong possibility that it is generally very, very effective and works very, very quickly. It is, again, it's hard. It's a hard few days when you're trying to implement the procedures, but if for children who really need it, it's definitely something to consider. Okay. As an additional resource, there's a lot of books on toilet training. This book, Toilet Training Success, is one that I highly recommend. I think it gives a really nice, balanced approach to toilet training. It goes through all of the steps. I do some procedures similar, some procedures a little bit different, but in general, this is one of my favorite books on toilet training that I think it's something that if you want some additional resources, you might want to check it out. Okay, so you're working on toilet training and you feel like you've got it, but sometimes things just don't go the way we expect. So I want to give you a few little hints about some things to try and figure out how can we improve. If things aren't going well, what should we do? What does the troubleshooting procedure look like? Well, the first thing you can do is, can you get help? Can you get help from a qualified board certified behavior analyst? Now, maybe I have to say that because I am a board certified behavior analyst, but I do actually believe that a board certified behavior analyst is very helpful and sometimes critical in training, especially for learners who are difficult to teach. Problem comes is that there are very, very subtle problems. You're doing it 95% right, but the little tiny thing that is not quite going right could be very, very small. But if you can't find it, if you can't figure it out, um, you might be stuck. There's an old joke about a plumber who comes and they say, "Can you help? Can you fix my sink?" And the plumber looks around for a few minutes, does something quick, takes about a second. He says, "Okay, that's $250." I says, "What? That only took you 2 minutes. Why is it $250?" Well, it's $5 for fixing the rent. It's $5 for fixing the screw. It's $245 to know where to fix the screw. And that's the kind of thing that I think a BCBA can help you with. Sometimes there's just a very small thing that's missing. And if you don't know where to look, you might have trouble finding it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few ideas of where to look. Where are some of those things that might go wrong? Okay, the first thing is, are the expectations clear? Now, I know you have used the modeling procedures, you've used video models, you have done the doll procedures, and you've modeled with the doll, but some kids don't have the prerequisite skills, and they just don't understand that the reinforcement occurs for the urine in the toilet. And the trick to this is the timing, the timing, the timing. This is where we were talking about observe carefully and make sure that you're reinforcing it just the right moment. And sometimes you might have to do some things to catch it at just the right moment so that you can reinforce and you can make the expectation clear that the urine in the toilet is what leads to the reinforcement. Occasionally, this is the problem at the beginning. And if you see this, this might be what you need to do. Is really try and capture it at just the right moment. Okay? Sometimes there are negative consequences for desired performance, but how could that be? I've saved all of the best reinforcers. His favorite thing is M&Ms. His favorite thing is the iPad. And I'm giving the M&Ms and the iPad as soon as he goes to it. What do you mean negative consequences for desired performance? Well, sometimes there are unusual situations. Like sometimes the paraprofessional has a habit of doing something like cheering. Wow, yay, I love it. And 95% of the time, that's exactly what we want. We want a super enthusiastic person to really go nuts when the child has a success for urinating in the toilet. But there are some kids that just don't like that. They don't like cheering. They like more quiet praise. They like more subtle social interaction. So one of the things I suggest is when the child has a success, when you have the urination in the toilet, what is the person doing exactly? Look at that very, very carefully. What does the child look happy about what the person did? Another way that there could be a negative consequence for the desired performance is if the child has some sort of phobia or fear of going in the toilet, or they're used to going in another place, like they always go in the bathtub or something like that, and now you're telling them to do it in a different way, and that could be an aversive situation. So I'd look for this, and the trick is look at what the kinds of things the child likes and use your social interactions in a way that is really going to be helpful for that child. Not a huge typical problem, but one that I've seen come up more than once. Okay. Here's another thing that comes up is, are there rewards for doing the wrong thing? So we talked about what to do when there is a potty accident, when there's a toileting accident. What should the parent do? What should the teacher do? There's a variety of choices, but sometimes the way that the teacher is doing it or the way that the parent is doing it is so fun and so interesting that the child might have the accident more on purpose. So again, this is a social interaction. That what it should look like is the child should be neutral. The child shouldn't be happy. We don't want the child to be upset, and we're trying to avoid any sort of serious negative consequences in most cases. But the child shouldn't look happy and excited when he makes a mistake, when he has the toileting accident. So if that's the case, look very, very carefully about how you correct. Sometimes there are children who really just do not care. They do not care for what, they do not care if they get the reward, they do not care if they get the error correction. They just do not care. It is a very rare situation, but I think it is something that I have seen, and I think it's worth looking for. If you see a child who just doesn't seem to have any motivation, if he goes, he goes. If he doesn't go, he doesn't go. He just sitting there. Look harder at your reinforcers. Be more creative. There are lists on the internet of all kinds of effective, creative ways to reinforce. And, if you look hard enough, you will find the answer. The assumption is that the adults have not been creative enough in thinking of what the reinforcers can be for this particular job. If you're creative, you will come up with something that will be effective. Here's something that comes up a surprising amount of times is that the parents will tell me, well, he was doing it really, really well. But then all of a sudden, he just stopped and he won't go on the potty anymore. He won't go into, I don't know what's wrong. Well, first thing, of course, is get a medical checkup. Make sure there's not some bladder infection or some sort of medical explanation that can explain why it suddenly stopped. But the thing is, I would look for changes. Did the team start doing something different? Are they requesting, and he is not able to request? Did they forget about doing the reminders? Are they not doing the reminders anymore? Is someone doing something funny when there's an accident that the child finds reinforcing? So look what changed. And it might be something about the child that changed, or it might be something about the environment that changed. But usually something is different. And if it's not the team, it might be the child. Maybe the things you were using as rewards. You know what? I'm sick of Skittles, and I don't really care anymore because because I don't care if I get Skittles anymore. I've already had too many. If I had never looked at a Skittle again for the rest of my life, I'd be totally happy. So forget it. So looking at what's changed. Sometimes we think that we can go faster. Oh, he is so smart, or he is doing so great at this. We're going to move along very, very fast. And often that could be a mistake. Often that can be a mistake. What you have to do is go one step at a time, step by step by step, slowly increase the time between reminders, slowly add the self-initiations and the requests, slowly fade out the rewards, and so on. Doing it step by step by step is the key to success. Sometimes you've just added too many steps, and it might be too much. Are you how? I saw one school where they were doing the toilet training in one room, but the bathroom that was the shared bathroom was all the way on the other end. The kids had to walk really far in order to get to the bathroom. Well, a couple of the kids did learn that way, but man, is it hard. It took a lot longer because when you have that, makes it a much harder expectation. So do the best you can to set it up step by step by step. Toilet training can be a life-changing experience. When you've been successful, you should be proud because you have now created new social opportunities, new vocational opportunities, all kinds of new life experiences that would not have been possible if the child wasn't there. So you should be proud, and I'm always excited when I see a child who's learned to toilet train. The child is so proud usually, and the staff and the team and the parents are all proud, and people understand that this really can make a tremendous difference going forward. So I like to go back to Poogie to remember things will go wrong. It will not go perfectly when you go to do your toilet training. There'll be mistakes, there'll be problems, you'll have setbacks. When you do, think Poogie, on a process of ongoing improvement. I am going to figure out what I did wrong and make the best steps going forward for the next time, for tomorrow or the next day. All right. So here's the point where I would have had some questions. And oh, am I going to miss having the opportunity to see some of my Pennsylvania friends and at the National Autism Conference, and I've done lots of presentations there in the past. I always get great questions from the audience, and I have talked about this topic before, and I have a few common things that come up, particularly from school district people, questions that they frequently ask. One common question that comes up: how do you get parent buy-in? So obviously, sometimes parents are hugely motivated to get to toilet training, and sometimes parents are like, no, it doesn't really bother me that much. It's fine, it can wait. But if they wait, all right, go ahead and implement potty training if you want at school. I'm not going to really do anything right now. The first thing I would say about this is um, often teams have not done enough to really get the parents on board as to why this is so critical and so important, and how it's really feasible and we can do this relatively quickly if we work together. And bring the parents in and talk. It's not a phone conversation or an email, in-person conversation, if assuming we're ever allowed to get together in person again. But the other piece of the buy-in is it's not always essential to do it first. I've seen many, many situations where the child is completely toilet trained at school and is not toilet trained at home. They still go in a diaper at home. They still wear a pull-up all over the place at home with the parents. Yet when they're at school, they're completely toilet trained. Then when the parents come in and say, oh, he has no accidents at school, and he goes to school, that often can be the step that gets the parent buy-in. Now, is it better if the home and school team are working together? 100%. Absolutely. But if the parent is going to let you and they give consent for you to engage in the toilet training at school, it is very, very possible to be successful at school, even if the parent is not working on it at all at home. It is not an excuse as to why you cannot be successful. Another Commonly asked question from school district folks is, how do you get the time to train the paraprofessionals? They have no time. They come in, the kids get there at 8:35, the paraprofessional shows up at 8:30. The kids leave at 2:45, paraprofessionals are leaving at 2:50. They have zero time. They get their 15-minute breaks, and we are always down paraprofessionals. We never have enough people. There is just no way that I can get the time to work with paraprofessionals to train them successfully. You mentioned the 1 hour training beforehand and so on. How do we get the time to do that? Well, certainly, this type of training is helpful, where you go over the steps and you explain what to do step by step, but it's not the most important. And you actually can do this with no classroom type training for the paraprofessionals. The way that works is you have someone come in and you work with the paraprofessional, showing them exactly what to do. So the trainer goes into the bathroom. This is what you need. You need a hands-on person. You need a person who can walk the walk, not just talk the talk. They go in the bathroom and they show the paraprofessional exactly what to do with the child. Then you watch the trainer watches the paraprofessional do it, and almost always they're not going to do it exactly right the first time. So the trainer's going to say, "Oh, that wasn't quite right. Here, let me show you. Do it again." And then you do that a few times until the paraprofessional has mastered the steps in the procedure. And you can be successful training as long as you have a trainer there that knows what to do, that can do more than just talk, but can actually work with a child. You can be successful even if you have no time with paraprofessionals. Okay, another commonly asked question is, I can't get the resources. If I want to buy some reinforcers, I have to fill out a requisition form, and it will take 3.5 months. And my child that really needs toilet training, he doesn't even have a one-to-one staff person with him. What am I going to do? There's just no way that I can implement a toilet. I don't have a potty seat. I don't have anything that I need. Well, it is true that in some situations, administrators are really have their hands tied, and it really is very, very little that can be done. However, I will say most of the time, certainly not all, but most of the time, if you go to the administrator and you sit down and you have a conversation about how essential this is in the child's IEP. I need these supplies in order to be successful. And we can't wait 3 months. We have to figure out a way to get the supplies quicker so that we can get these programs done. Often you can be successful. Don't be like Barry from the Bronx. You have to be like Barry from Bethel, Connecticut. You have to be nice, calm, but firm and assertive in working through the bureaucracy to get it done. Certainly, can it be done every time? No. Sometimes the obstacles are just too big, but often, more times than you think, it really can be done. Okay, a quick summary of what we talked about. So, toilet training is one of the most important skills. Children with autism and developmental disabilities. Probably one of the most important things that you're going to teach in early intervention. It's important for everybody on the team to realize this and really focus on making sure that this skill is accomplished. Proper preparation is essential. You have to need supplies. You have to make sure the child has all the prerequisite skills to be ready to go. You have to make sure the team is ready, that they have the time and resources and training necessary to be effective. You want to carefully choose the right method that's both likely to be effective. Don't pick a method that's not likely to be effective for a particular child, but also don't pick a method that's completely impractical based on where you're working and the resources that you have. Right balance of effective and practical. There's extensive research on toilet training. That research can be used as a guide for success. It's been replicated over and over again. It is likely to be effective if you follow it. This is going to be challenging. There's going to be some problems. It's a doable project. You can do this. I hope that during today's presentation, you got to the point where if you're thinking, I can't do it, you're thinking now, yes, I can. I really feel like we're going to make it. We are going to be able to be successful in toy training. All the kids in the preschool, or all the older kids in the middle school and high school who may be having successful toy training. Okay. If you have any follow-up questions, I would be happy. One of the great things I love about presenting in Pennsylvania is all the people that I get to meet. I usually meet a lot of parents and teachers during my presentation in Pennsylvania, seeing all my Pennsylvania friends. I really do eagerly like to get feedback and like to hear from people. So feel free, my email address is listed there. I would love to hear from anybody who has feedback on the presentation. How can I poogie the presentation in the future? What can I do better? What questions do you have? If you can't find any of the resources, let me know and I'll try and help you find some of the resources. I also have a blog that has free advice on a whole wide variety of topics for kids with autism and developmental disabilities. I'd love you to come check it out at poogie.net, POOGI.net. And as always, I hope that you are on a poogie, because that's the main thing. The attitude of poogie is your number one importance, because our goal is to make a difference in the lives of children with autism and developmental disabilities. Toy training is one of the most important things that we can do. And if you're on a poogie, you will be successful. You will be able to do this. Thank you.